Welcome to Within the Frame, where we're joined by experts to discuss the most up-to-date issues from across the globe. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. North Korea reportedly kicked off the 11th session of the 14th Supreme People's Assembly on Monday. It's garnered much attention as the regime hinted at revising its constitution to remove unification-related clauses and clarify territorial boundaries. But in a rare move, the regime state media did not report on the results of the assembly the following day, which is today. Now, instead, it reported on leader Kim Jong-un's message to use nuclear weapons if the regime's enemies attempt to use armed forces against them. So what's taking the regime so long, and what could leader Kim's mention of nuclear force actually mean? For an in-depth analysis, we first connect to Bruce Klinger, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, online for us. Welcome to the show, Mr. Klinger.
Thank you for having me.
We're also joined by Pan Gil-ju, Research Professor at Ilmin International Relations Institute of Korea University. Good to have you, Professor.
Good evening. Delighted to be here.
Thank you for joining us both. Now, let's begin our discussion with Mr. Klinger. The assembly seems to be all the more important this time around. Normally, North Korea reports on their decisions the day after the assembly ends. But up until today, there was no specific mention. Could they be extending the meeting for a second day, or is it just the announcement that's coming late?
Well, actually, we don't know, but there have been previous instances where senior level leadership meetings did go over one day. So we really can't read too much into the fact that they haven't yet reported on the speech that Kim Jong-un likely made. But as you pointed out earlier, that we are all waiting with great interest what changes North Korea may have decided and whether they revise their constitution. So territorial boundaries, such as the northern limit line, whether they would have extended further south their existing claims, whether they've institutionalized Kim's earlier speeches during this year of abandoning reconciliation or unification with South Korea. So this Supreme People's Assembly is being weighted with a great deal of interest and perhaps even some trepidation.
Right. Now, even though there was no report on the meeting, the North Korean leader delivered a stern message at the Kim Jong-un University of National Defense, claiming that the regime could use nuclear weapons in case of any military attack. Professor Ban, what message can we infer from his words?
As you are well aware, since the meeting of the Supreme People's Assembly is now underway, his words have something to do with the ongoing amendment of the Constitution. First, his message shows that the possible attempt to terminate terms like unification and Korean ethnic groups from its constitution is intended to make South Korea feel threatened substantially by North Korea's nuclear weapons. In particular, Kim Jong-un's words imply that North Korea could use nuclear weapons militarily to occupy, suppress, and reclaim the south of the Korean Peninsula, as he mentioned last January. In this vein, his message is intended to prevent South Korea from assertively responding to North Korea's hostile provocations. Second, his word shows that the Kim regime attempts to make ordinary North Koreans not grumble about internal issues, but focus on external threats while highlighting absolute weapons like nuclear weapons. In short, this can be defined as a diversionary theory of war from the viewpoint of international politics. Third, his message is a type of nuclear coercion targeting the two audiences. The first audience is South Korea. Kim Jong-un's words on the use of nuclear weapons are intended to offset South Korea's monster missile, Hyunmoo-5, which poses a serious threat to Kim Jong-un himself. The second audience is the United States. His words are intended to maximize his negotiating power with the next American president. In short, Kim Jong-un wants to seize the initiative of possible nuclear arms control talks, which fundamentally allow North Korea to become a recognized nuclear power in the world.
Right, so there seems to be a lot of intentions in those words. What about you, Mr. Klinger? Could this be a warning of a seventh possible nuclear test?
Well, we've been waiting for a seventh test since back in March of 2022, when both Washington and Seoul said that the test was imminent, and obviously that didn't occur. We know that it's more a matter of when they do it as opposed to if. They have a new generation of tactical warheads for battlefield use that they've been developing and perhaps deploying, but they haven't yet tested it. So we're expecting at some point they will have to test those battlefield nuclear weapons. It would be a smaller explosion than the last one in 2017, which was quite large because it was a hydrogen bomb. Now, there's a lot of speculation whether they will do it before the U.S. election, though that wouldn't influence the U.S. election. The U.S. voters are going to make their choices based on a lot of other issues, or whether they would do it after the election to try to send a signal of perhaps resumption of negotiations if President Trump is reelected. So at some point, they're likely to test, and we don't really know what the political calculation of the timing of it would be.
Right. Now, moving on, another thing to note is that on the Assembly Day, North Korea floated trash balloons towards the south, and it's already the second straight day and the 26th time only this year. Professor Bun, what are they trying to say?
To be honest, first, Pyongyang wants to say that the trash balloon operations are not a short-term scheme, but a part of a long-term strategy without hiatus. These provocations show that psychological warfare and gray zone warfare continue to be made by North Korea in any event. Second, trash balloons have something to do with stepping up complex threats. North Korea is most likely to consolidate this changed policy towards South Korea through the assembly meeting, which can be defined as lawfare. North Korea also steps up its level of nuclear threats, as we discuss here. Furthermore, North Korea continues gray zone provocations by flowering trashy balloons. All these interconnected harsh measures are made under the logic of complex provocations. So North Korea wants to say that South Korea should take requests from North Korea while stressing that South Korea's deterrence cannot work as planned under these complex threats. Third, a raft of trashy balloon provocations is intended to divide South Korean society internally and bungle the current administration's policies on North Korea, like peace through strength. Since trash balloons make ordinary citizens feel inconvenient and insecure, North Korea believes that South Korean society can be more divided and conflicting internally through trashy balloon operations on the policy of North Korea. Pyongyang believes that this internal division and conflict could weaken South Korea's deterrent power and serve as a great opportunity to maximize the effectiveness of its military and nuclear provocations.
Right, so this has been ongoing, and this move could persist in the near future. Now, going back to the assembly, Professor, experts are keeping a close eye on whether the regime will revise their constitution in a way that could threaten security in the Korean Peninsula. We slightly touched upon it a while ago. Now, what kind of changes could we expect, and what could that imply for South Korea?
Well, Mr. Klinger made a good analysis. The reason why this meeting of the Supreme People's Assembly is under the greatest attention is that North Korea is most likely to reflect and revise its new stance on inter-Korean relations. Last December, Kim Jong-un defined inter-Korean relations as the relations between two states hostile to each other, not the homogeneous ones anymore. So the unification policy is made very differently than before. Then, in January, Kim Jong-un ordered to reflect and revise this new definition of inter-Korean relations in its constitution. His orders can be summarized in 4 points. First, his order was that terms like unification and ethnic groups as Korean should be terminated from its constitution. Second, his order includes that the constitution should define the Republic of Korea as the #1 enemy. This order has something to do with the measures to consolidate North Koreans' hostile minds toward South Koreans. Third, North Korea's objective is expected to newly clarify how to achieve unification when dealing with South Korea. As you pointed out earlier in the initiating remark on today's Nodong Shinmun, Kim Jong-un mentioned that he is not interested in unification by force. However, this word is hard to believe because this word is conflicting with the other message. As I pointed out earlier, Kim Jong-un mentioned that North Korea should occupy, suppress, and reclaim the southern part of the Korean Peninsula in the event of war. This implies that North Korea has shifted from unification through negotiation to unification by force. Finally, Kim Jong-un ordered to newly include articles on its territory. In particular, the maritime borderline seems to be included in the revised constitution. All these four dimensions are expected to be dealt with in this meeting of the Supreme People's Assembly. What it implies here is that North Korea could be more assertive and more offensive. As a result, tension in the Korean Peninsula is most likely to be maximized in the wake of the amendment and follow actions like provocations.
Right, so it actually is a very big shift from what we've been seeing in the past. Now, Mr. Klinger, if the Constitution does get amended, it comes in around a year since the regime last revised its law. How do you read into the timing, and what do you think triggered such kind of amendment?
Well, the North Korean Constitution has only been revised 10 times since the founding of the North Korea. It went many decades before the first revision, and then a number of years before the second and third. However, during Kim Jong-un's reign, North Korea has revised it a number of times, actually twice in 2019. So it seems to be a change in focus or a change in prioritization by Kim Jong-un, where he sees the ability or the necessity to revise the North Korean Constitution far more frequently than either of his two successors. It seems to be triggered by Kim's new point of view that he articulated earlier this year of abandoning unification, abandoning reconciliation with South Korea, and that they now see it as two different nations rather than two parts of one nation, and even identifying South Korea as a hostile nation. So, and that had led some to predict that there would be war on the peninsula this year, or at least a lot of more provocations than actually we've seen so far to date. But it seems to be encapsulating Kim's different vision that North Korea really has no interest in reconciling or perhaps even engaging with South Korea.
But meanwhile, North Korea is also poised to scrap the historical 1991 Basic Agreement, which acted as a definition of the relationship between the two Koreas. Mr. Klinger, could you remind us what the agreement centered on, and if the agreement gets scrapped, what changes could we see?
Well, the more formal, lengthier name of the Basic Agreement was the Agreement on Reconciliation, Non-Aggression, and Cooperation between the two Koreas. So that really encapsulates what the intention was. It was during a time when there was hope that the two countries could not only live peaceably together, but also pledge to not interfere in the internal affairs of each other's country, also hoping to lay a path for reconciliation and eventually unification. And there were different versions of unification between North and South, but eventually it was seen that it could bring the two countries together. Over the years, we've seen that the hope for that has certainly dissipated, and now North Korea is really saying that it has no intention of trying to unify with South Korea. They say even not do it by force or even through negotiations. So what we've seen is really the North Korea saying that it's not going to reach out to North Korea. Now, whether that means an increased hostility, not necessarily so, but we're not going to see much engagement between the two Koreas.
Right, so far less negotiation and talks we're expecting. Pundits also say that the regime is set to clarify its maritime boundary and declaring new maritime borders south of the NLL at the meeting. Some see it as the North's bid to use it as an excuse for provocations. What's your take on this, Professor Pan?
Well, dealing with the new maritime border on its constitution is a clear sign to make an excuse for possible provocations. In fact, Kim Jong-un hinted at the possibility that North Korea could make provocations related to the amendment of its constitution. Before the meeting of the Supreme People's Assembly, Kim Jong-un observed artillery drills. His visit to this unit clearly shows what the post-amendment measures look like in the future. Meanwhile, the three scenarios are possible on how to reflect a new maritime border on its constitution. First, North Korea could officially reflect the 2007 maritime patrol line on its constitution. This line used to serve as a patrol line for its navy up until now, but the constitutional reflection means that its status would change from an operational line to a legal borderline in its favor. Second, the 1999 maritime borderline could resurface, which means that the line is made further deep down to the south. Third, North Korea might keep a gray zone principle even in a situation where it establishes a new maritime borderline while not opening the new line externally.
Right. Now, staying with security, Seoul and Washington recently struck a 5-year deal called the Special Measures Agreement to station 28,500 U.S. forces here. Professor, can you elaborate for our viewers on some of the details and how you assess the latest deal?
Well, in general, the time required for the SMA negotiation has been from a half year to 1.5 years, while dealing with quite a few differences. In this sense, I would say that the latest deal is quite successful for both countries in three aspects: timing, contents, and value. First, South Korea and the United States completed the SMA negotiation just 5 months after they initiated last April. If then, why did they start the negotiation early and complete it fast? I have to say that it was intended to grapple with the Trump risk early enough. If Trump returns to the White House, he might ask South Korea for a maximized increase in defense sharing, making the ROK-US alliance stumble. In this vein, the fastest deal is expected to contribute to alliance management in the future. Second, South Korea and the United States made a manageable and rational deal for both in this latest SMA negotiations. The total amount for 2026 is 1,590 billion won, increased by 8.3%. This amount is much less than in the 2021 negotiation, which is 13.9%. In addition, South Korea and the United States agreed not to use the SMA money for maintaining American forces off the Korean Peninsula. Moreover, they confirmed that the annual growth rate should be based on an increase in consumer price index, not an increase in defense expenditure. Third, both countries highlighted the value of alliance, not a transactional approach, while laying out meaningful output within short time and with rational outcomes. This could help allies continue to stress value rather than money for international stability and peace around the world. All in all, the latest deal can be defined as a win-win game for both countries. If Trump returns to the White House, he might attempt to start all over again. However, since this latest deal served as a reference point, a significant change seems to be extremely difficult.
Right. Well, what about Mr. Klinger? Are you on the same page with Professor Bond?
Yes, if President Trump comes back to office, we're not certain what his policies would be. And like any newly elected or re-elected president, I think he'd want to focus on domestic issues and economic issues. But of course, foreign policy interferes with those plans. But I think the countries that would be most focused on by a re-elected Trump administration would be Russia, Ukraine, and China, Taiwan, and the Middle East. So indications of a resumption of North Korea-U.S. dialogue, I think, would more likely come from Pyongyang than Washington. When it comes to alliances, if we extrapolate from the first administration of President Trump, there could be a resumption of tensions between the allies, although with the special measures agreement negotiations completed, that removes one major area for disagreement, unless, as Professor Bond mentioned, that Trump wants to reopen those negotiations. So, but I think President Trump would be pushing South Korea to assume a larger security role in the Indo-Pacific, particularly against China's aggression and coercion of its neighbors, and also its attempts to extend its influence beyond where it has been to date.
Right, so we'll have to keep close tabs on the election results of the U.S. I'm afraid we'll have to leave our discussion there, gentlemen. Many thanks for your insights, Mr. Klinger and Professor Bond.
Thanks for having me.
Now that wraps up our program for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back on Thursday at 8:30 p.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.